Yeah, I've done numerous videos on Jeff Sessions because I am diametrically opposed to him becoming Attorney General. And back in '86, even though Jeff Sessions didn't get confirmation for the federal judgeship he was looking for, it wasn't for the lack of trying. Jeff Sessions got all kinds of cover, and in particular from the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Strom Thurmond. I'm going to read you a story out of BuzzFeed where Coretta Scott King wrote a letter blasting Jeff Sessions on race. The damning letter, which helped deny Sessions a federal judgeship in 1986, was never entered into the congressional record. It was finally published this past Tuesday evening. In 1986, as the Senate was considering the nomination of Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III for federal judge, Coretta Scott King wrote an impassioned plea to the members of the Judiciary Committee. Sessions, whose nomination had initially seemed routine, was suddenly on the ropes after witnesses accused him of using racial slurs and using his position as a U.S. Attorney General to target civil rights activists in Alabama. The letter would become a key part of the case against Sessions, who would ultimately be defeated when his home state senator, the late Howell Heflin, shocked the Senate and voted against the confirmation. The Washington Post published a full 10-page letter from King to the committee Tuesday evening. And I'm going to attach a link in the information box so that you can read the letter for yourself. Excuse me. At the time of the hearing, Judiciary Committee Chairman Strom Thurmond never put the letter into the congressional record, and its contents remain largely unknown. In the only line that was made public at the time, published in June 1986 by Night Reader reporter Aaron Epstein, King made clear her opposition to Sessions' nomination. For a century, the racial practices that characterized our region were established and enforced by men who, like Mr. Sessions, protested that they too were not personally hostile to blacks, King's letter said, according to Epstein's dispatch. Now Sessions, who would go on to become Alabama's Attorney General before replacing Heflin in the Senate in '97, is once again before the Senate for confirmation, this time as President-elect Donald Trump's Attorney General. It's unclear why Thurmond didn't include the letter in the record. Chairman Chuck Grassley's office did not respond to requests for the letter, and sources told BuzzFeed News that Democratic members' hands are tied by committee rules that give Grassley the sole authority to release it. But we got it. Additionally, the King Center, the Atlanta-based memorial and nonprofit that manages Coretta Scott King's papers as well as those of her late husband, said it has not finished processing her papers and could not provide a copy of the letter. Epstein, the reporter who obtained a copy in 1986, told BuzzFeed News he no longer has a copy and could not recall details of its contents beyond what was printed at the time. It's unlikely King's testimony alone will derail Sessions' nomination. The Senate rarely rejects nominations for one of its own, and with Republicans controlling the chamber, it appears likely he will be installed at the Department of Justice. Now that it has been released, the letter may prove embarrassing to Sessions. Sessions' 1986 defeat deeply wounded the Alabama conservative, and as a senator, he made a point of backing a number of civil rights measures, particularly those connected to King. For instance, he sponsored legislation to give King and Rosa Parks the Congressional Gold Medals, backed a bill to place a statue of Parks in the U.S. Capitol, and voted for a 2006 reauthorization of the Civil Rights Act named after King. Following King's death in 2006, Sessions lauded her, saying in a statement that it marks yet another sad passing of a historic leader in the movement for equal rights in America. So basically, he was trying to cover his tracks because he knew about all the dirt that he had done and all the negative things that he had said and done as far as the civil rights movement were concerned. Now, here is the letter, and I'm going to leave a link. Let me see if the actual it's a 10-page letter. Let me zoom it up. And bring it in. Okay, here we go. The Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, Inc., dated a letter March 19, 1986, sent to the Honorable Strom Thurmond, Chairman of the Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate, Washington, D.C., regarding the nomination of Jefferson B. Sessions, U.S. Judge, Southern District of Alabama, hearing March 13, 1986. Dear Senator Thurmond, I write to express my sincere opposition to the confirmation of Jefferson B. Sessions as a federal district court judge for the Southern District of Alabama. My professional and personal roots in Alabama are deep and lasting. Anyone who has used the power of his office as United States Attorney to intimidate and chill the free exercise of the ballot by citizens should not be elevated to our courts. Mr. Sessions has used the awesome powers of his office in a shabby attempt to intimidate and frighten elderly black voters. For this reprehensible conduct, he should not be rewarded with a federal judgeship. I regret that a long-standing commitment prevents me from appearing in person to testify against this nominee. However, I have attached a copy of my statement opposing Mr. Sessions' confirmation, and I request that my statement as well as this letter be made a part of the hearing record. I do sincerely urge you to oppose the confirmation of Mr. Sessions. Sincerely, Coretta Scott King. Carbon copy to the Honorable Joseph R. Biden Jr., United States Senate. So Joe Biden had this shit too. Okay. Statement of Coretta Scott King on the nomination of Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III for the United States District Court, Southern District of Alabama, March 13, 1986. Okay, here's her statement. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to express my strong opposition to the nomination of Jefferson Sessions for a federal district judgeship for the Southern District of Alabama. My long withstanding commitment, which I shared with my husband, Martin, to protect and enhance the rights of Black Americans' rights, which include equal access to the democratic process, compels me to testify today. Civil rights leaders, including my husband and Albert Turner, have fought long and hard to achieve free and unfettered access to the ballot box. Mr. Sessions has used the awesome power of his office to chill the free exercise of the vote by black citizens in a district he now seeks to serve as a federal judge. This simply cannot be allowed to happen. Mr. Sessions' conduct as U.S. Attorney, from his politically motivated voting for persecutions to his indifference towards criminal violations of civil rights laws, indicates that he lacks the temperament, fairness, and judgment to be a federal judge. The Voting Rights Act was and still is vitally important to the future of democracy in the United States. I was privileged to join Martin and many others during the Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights in 1965. Martin was particularly impressed by the determination to get the franchise of blacks in Selma and neighboring Perry County. As he wrote, certainly no community in the history of the Negro struggle has responded with the enthusiasm of Selma and her neighboring town of Marion. Where Birmingham depended largely upon students and unemployed adults to participate in nonviolent protest of the denial of the franchise, Selma was involved fully 10% of the Negro population in active demonstrations, and at least half the Negro population of Marion was arrested on one day. Martin was referring, of course, to a group that included the defendants recently prosecuted for assisting elderly and illiterate blacks to exercise that franchise. In fact, Martin anticipated from the depth of their commitment 20 years ago that a united political organization will remain in Perry County long after the other marchers had left. This organization, the Perry County Civic League started by Mr. Turner, Mr. Hogue, and others. The organization, the Perry County Civic League, was started by Mr. Turner, Mr. Hogue, and others. As Martin predicted, continued to direct the drive for votes and other rights. In the years since the Voting Rights Act was passed, Black Americans in Marion, Selma, and elsewhere have made important strides in their struggle to participate actively in the electoral process. The number of blacks registered to vote in key southern states has doubled since 1965. This would not have been possible without the Voting Rights Act. However, blacks still fall far short of having equal participation in the electoral process, particularly in the South. Efforts continue to be made to deny blacks access to the polls, even where blacks constitute the majority of the voters. It has been a long uphill struggle to keep alive the vital legislation that protects the most fundamental right to vote. A person who has exhibited so much hostility to the enforcement of those laws and thus to the exercise of those rights by black people should not be elevated to the federal bench. The irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that, if confirmed, he will be given a life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods. 20 years ago, when we marched from Selma to Montgomery, the fear of voting was real, as the broken bones and bloody heads in Selma and Marion bore witness. As my husband wrote at the time, it was not just a sick imagination that conjured up the vision of a public official sworn to uphold the law, who forced the inhuman march upon hundreds of Negro children, who ordered the Reverend James Bevel to be chained to his sickbed, who clubbed a Negro woman registrant, and who callously inflicted repeated brutalities and indignities upon nonviolent Negroes peacefully petitioning for their constitutional right to vote. Free exercise of voting rights is so fundamental to American democracy that we cannot tolerate any form of infringement of these rights. Of all the groups who have been disenfranchised in our nation's history, none has struggled longer or suffered more in the attempt to win the vote than black citizens. No group has had access to the ballot box denied so persistently and intently. Over the past century, a broad array of schemes have been used in attempts to block the black vote. The range of techniques developed with the purpose of repressing black voting rights run the gambit from the straightforward application of brutality against black citizens who tried to vote to such legalized frauds as grandfather clause exclusions and rigged literacy tests. The actions taken by Mr. Sessions in regard to the 1984 voting fraud prosecutions represent just one more technique used to intimidate black voters and thus deny them this most precious franchise. The investigations into the absentee voting process were conducted only in the black belt counties where blacks had finally achieved political power in the local government. Whites had been using the absentee process to their advantage for years without incident. Then, when blacks, realizing its strength, began to use it with success, criminal investigations were begun. In these investigations, Mr. Sessions, as U.S. Attorney, exhibited an eagerness to bring to trial and convict 3 leaders of the Perry County Civic League, including Albert Turner, despite evidence clearly demonstrating their innocence of any wrongdoing. Furthermore, in initiating the case, Mr. Sessions ignored allegations of similar behavior by whites, choosing instead to chill the exercise of the franchise by blacks by his misguided investigation. I had made mention of this previously, that Sessions had ignored white people actually coming to him and telling him about voter fraud in other counties. Instead, he chose to concentrate on this. Now, you tell me why. In continuing to read the letter, in fact, Mr. Sessions sought to punish older black civil rights activists, advisors, and colleagues of my husband who had been key figures in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. These were persons who, realizing the potential of the absentee vote among blacks, had learned to use the process within the bounds of legality and had taught others to do the same. The only sin they committed was being too successful in gaining votes. The scope and character of the investigations conducted by Mr. Sessions also warrant grave concern. Witnesses were selectively chosen in accordance with the favorability of their testimony to the government's case. Also, the prosecution illegally withheld from the defense critical statements made by witnesses. Witnesses who did testify were pressured and intimidated into submitting the correct, in quotation marks, testimony. Many elderly blacks were visited multiple times by the FBI, who then hauled them over 180 miles by bus to a grand jury in Mobile when they could more easily have testified at a grand jury 20 miles away in Selma. These voters and others have announced they are now never going to vote again. I urge you to consider carefully Mr. Sessions' conduct in these matters. Such a review, I believe, raises serious questions about his commitment to the protection of the voting rights of all American citizens, and consequently his fair and unbiased judgment regarding this fundamental right. When the circumstances and facts surrounding the indictments of Al Turner, his wife Evelyn, and Spencer Hogue are analyzed, it becomes clear that the motivation was political and the result frightening. The wide-scale chill of the exercise of the ballot for blacks who suffered so much to receive that right in the first place. Therefore, it is my strongly held view that the appointment of Jefferson Sessions to the federal bench would irreparably damage the work of my husband, Al Turner, and countless others who risked their lives and freedom over the past 20 years to ensure equal participation in our democratic system. The exercise of the franchise is an essential means by which our citizens ensure that those who are governing will be responsible. My husband called it the number one civil right. The denial of access to the ballot box ultimately results in the denial of other fundamental rights. 4. It is only when our poor and disadvantaged are empowered that they are able to participate actively in the solutions to their own problems. We still have a long way to go before we can say that minorities no longer need to be concerned about discrimination at the polls. Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and Asian Americans are grossly underrepresented at every level of government in America. If we are going to make our timeless dream of justice through democracy a reality, we must take every possible step to ensure that the spirit and intent of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the 15th Amendment of the Constitution is honored. The federal courts hold a unique position in our constitutional system, ensuring that minorities and other citizens without political power have a forum in which to vindicate their rights. Because of this unique role, it is essential that the people selected to be federal judges respect the basic tenets of our legal system, respect for individual rights, and a commitment to equal justice for all. The integrity of the courts, and thus the rights they protect, can only be maintained if citizens feel confident that those selected as federal judges will be able to judge with fairness others holding differing views. I do not believe Jefferson Sessions possesses the requisite judgment, competence, and sensitivity to the rights guaranteed by the federal civil rights laws to qualify for appointment to the federal district court. Based on his record, I believe his confirmation would have a devastating effect on not only the judicial system in Alabama, but also on the progress we have made everywhere toward fulfilling my husband's dream that he envisioned over 20 years ago. I therefore urge the Senate Judiciary Committee to deny his confirmation. I thank you for allowing me to share my views. It said it all then, and it says it all now. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions was, and still is, a racist. And all he has done since that point in time is to try to cover his tracks by co-sponsoring and supporting various pieces of legislation that, in my view, he doesn't actually believe in, but he needs to have something so that when stuff like this is brought out, he can hold up all of these various bills that he has supported and say, look, I've supported black people. I'm not a racist. That's bullshit. Some of your biggest racists are the ones that claim that they're not racist. Some of your biggest racists don't have a problem as far as hiring black people so that they can lord over them and utilize their authority in order to abash them and treat them in the worst way possible. I know that I said that I was going to include this particular video or link in another video, but this particular video deserved its own time.